My name is Derek Fortini. I'm the director of the Estes Park Museum. Today is December 7th, 2021. We're at the Estes Park Museum and we'll be interviewing Greg White. So please state your name, birth date, and where you were born.
My name is Greg White. I was born on January 15th, 1947 in Julesburg, Colorado.
And you were talking about that you grew up in Loveland. Can you go ahead and tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, my family moved to Loveland in 1954. My father, who was Claire White, took a job with the First National Bank in Loveland, and so we moved from Julesburg to Loveland. It was my mother, Ethel White, and I had a sister, Claudia, and myself. So I started in Loveland, second grade, Garfield School in Loveland.
And did you and your family come up to Estes Park when you were?
Yes, we did. My first memory of Estes Park is we came up and there was a place called the Hobby Horse, which is right down there by the Bureau of Reclamation golf course. And they had a little resort and they had a pony ride. And that's the first time I ever rode a horse. Of course, it was a pony. But I remember getting on that pony and riding around a little ring. And that's my first memory of Estes Park. So, yes, we would come up to Estes Park mainly in the summer. And then I learned to ski at Hidden Valley. And I started skiing probably in junior high, probably when I was 12 years old, something like that. And I learned to ski in Hidden Valley, go up there. And before I skied, we used to come up and skate on the beaver ponds just outside of Hidden Valley there. And so we did that. The other thing I remember distinctly, they used to have a little train called Casey's Train next to the river, across from where the library is now in that area, and come up and ride on that little train. So those are some of the early memories. And then when I got into high school, into college, then we came up a lot in the summer when I was still around. And after I turned 18, of course, we had the Rock Inn and we had Jack Snacks and Perry's. So we spent a lot of time in those establishments.
So can you give us a little history of your educational background?
Yes, I graduated from Loveland High School in 1965. I went to Stanford University in Palo Alto, California. Graduated with a bachelor's degree in history, and then went to the University of Colorado Law School in the fall of 1969. I graduated from law school in 1974. You might ask why there's a gap in there. I was drafted into the Army in January of 1970. So I spent 2 years in the Army and then went back to law school and graduated in 74.
And then once you graduated, how did your career kick off?
When I came back from the Army and was going to school in the summer, I worked as an intern at Hartwell and Babcock, Ernie Hartwell, who was the town attorney, and Bill Babcock. And I worked summers there, and they offered me a job when I graduated and passed the bar in 1974. So I started with them, and within a couple of years it was Hartwell, Babcock, and White, and basically I did a general law practice at the time. Ernie was the town attorney, so I did a little town work, but not very much. And Bill was assistant, and if Ernie wasn't doing it, Bill was doing it. So that's when I started.
And then when did you first become the town attorney for Estes Park?
I became town attorney in May of 1980. Ernie Hartwell retired from practice in 1977 due to health concerns. Unfortunately, he had Lou Gehrig's disease, and so he retired. And that was Bill Babcock and myself, so we were Babcock and White. Bill was the town attorney, and I was an assistant, although at the time he did most of the work. In 1980, Bill became the first full-time attorney for the town of Loveland, city of Loveland. So when he did that, I was offered the job as town attorney in May of 1980. And I actually combined, we formed a law firm of Hammond, Clark, and White, and Lynn Hammond and Roger Clark were the former contract attorneys for the city of Loveland when Bill took over. So then it was Hammond, Clark, and White. So,
Would it be common for one office to have two towns?
well, but Bill Babcock took over for Loveland, so Lynn and Roger retired.
Okay.
So Lynn still did a lot of the water work for the city of Loveland, but Bill Babcock was the city attorney. So
what were your first impressions of the town of Estes Park as a municipal government?
my first impression was that the town government was business oriented. The board was composed of all basically downtown business people. There were a few others, but they were downtown's business. The main focus was tourism and Elkhorn Avenue. The staff was pretty small at the time, and basically they weren't involved with a lot of activities other than basically your land planning, police, the electric department, and the water department. So it was pretty small, but it was definitely business oriented when I first started.
And you had mentioned that your first town board meeting actually took place in Town Hall when it was in Bond Park. What do you recall about that meeting?
All I recall was I think it was, it had to be before 78 or 74. I think the town hall moved where it is now. That was Estes Park High School in 1974. I must have come up sometime when I was interning, when Ernie couldn't make it for some reason. The town board meeting was in Town Hall, which is in Bond Park, which also included the town library, the town hall, and the Chamber of Commerce, all in a series of buildings, small buildings really, in Bond Park. So they're all together. And all I remember was a fairly cramped environment. The boardroom wasn't very big. I remember Ron Brody was mayor, and that's about all I remember. But I do remember one meeting there in Bond Park.
So you weren't the first attorney for the town, obviously. Can we gather some of your knowledge about Estes Park's town attorneys that preceded you?
Sure. First of all, the first town attorney, I think, was, at least, maybe not the first one, but starting in the 1920s, was a guy named Ab Romans. He was from Loveland. I don't know Mr. Romans. He was dead before I came upon the scene. But he was in Loveland. And then the next one was Hatfield Chilson. And Hatfield Chilson took over from Ab. Now, Hatfield Chilson I know very well because he was a good friend of my father's, and he practiced, all the attorneys in Loveland practiced in the First National Bank building. All the offices were in the second floor of the First National Bank building. So they were all together. So my dad was vice president of the bank, so he knew them all, and actually they were personal friends with, he was personal friends with Hatfield Chilson, and after Hatfield, he went to Washington, I believe in about 1956, became Undersecretary of the Interior under Eisenhower, and then when he came back, he was appointed to the 10th Circuit Court federal judge in Denver, and that's where he spent his time until he retired. So, and after Chili, that was his nickname, I think the next person was probably Bob McCreary. Bob was a partner of Chili's and took over. Bob died of a heart attack. We were also good friends with them in Loveland. Died of a heart attack, and I think about 1959 or 1960. And I believe in 1960, then Ernie Hartwell probably was appointed town attorney. And then Ernie served till 1977 when he retired. And then briefly, in 1977, for about 9 months, John Phipps was town attorney. John was was an attorney in Loveland, moved up to Estes Park and became town attorney. John lasted 9 months when he resigned, mainly because he had too many conflicts of interest. At that time, he had a general law practice, and a lot of his clients would have dealings with the town. I mean, whether it was liquor licenses or land use issues or whatever. Of course, he couldn't represent them because he was town attorney, so it took him 9 months to realize that he needed to do that, and that time Bill Babcock was appointed. And then later, I was appointed in 1980. So for some reason, all the attorneys were from Loveland.
Do you think it was on purpose to avoid
I don't-
conflict of interest?
I think that may have been part of it. John's an example, but I think mainly they were the qualified attorneys at the time. And Loveland's not that far. And as you can see from that little recitation, it was kind of success by the next guy who was kind of in line, just like I did, from Ernie to Bill to myself.
So let's talk about some of your more memorable experiences as town attorney and some of the topics that you were directly involved with. Can we go ahead and talk about some involvement with land use?
Sure. Beginning right from the, when I started in 1980, one of the things that I was asked to do was attend all of the town board meetings and planning commission meetings. That had not been done before. The attorney only came up and attended those meetings when the specific topics were on. So in 1980, when I was hired, the Mayor Harry Trejan, first of all, he asked me, he said, one, Greg, will you make town business your top priority? And I said, I will. And he said, okay. And it became apparent to me that that was the important part of my hiring, and I tried to do that all the way through my career. But, so land use has always been an issue in Estes Park, as it is in most municipalities, because it's kind of core to the living environment. So land use issues were always there right from the start. So.
And what type of issues would there have been? Was anything controversial with the county? Things like that? In the 80s, yes. There was always controversy with the county and the national park for land use issues. The park became very concerned about wildlife migration in and out of the park, and also the eastern boundaries of the park, and were participated a lot in any developments that would threaten those various things. And obviously, one of the problems was that a lot of the developable land was right next to the park, and also the elk, they migrate all through and have continued to migrate through. So that became contentious, because in any community, you have a group of people that live there that are not necessarily pro-development. A lot of people are. The community usually is pro-development, but there are people that are not pro-development, and they use issues such as wildlife migration, Rocky Mountain National Park, to try to scale down development or to deny development permits. So that was always a big issue for development throughout the 80s, so into the 90s. Would the local land trust get involved with some of this too?
The local land trust eventually became involved, but really in the start of the 80s, the land trust was not active. I don't know when the Estes Valley Land Trust was formed. They obviously became active, and they're still very active, but no, they weren't a party to that at that time.
How about, can you go ahead and tell me about your involvement with the water use in Estes Park?
Sure. In Estes Park's water, let me just get into water. The Estes Park water rights were very junior, and junior means that they were subject to be put on call. You couldn't take the water because actually Estes Park water rights weren't adjudicated in water court till 1939. And those were direct flow rights in Fall River, Glacier Creek, and the Big Thompson River. Black Canyon Creek. Because they were junior, the town needed to have other water sources. They had three other water sources. Out of the building of the Big Thompson project, the town got a contract with the United States government for 500 acre feet of water for the Big Thompson project. It's not CBT water, it's separate, but it's delivered and through the Big Thompson project, but it's directly, the contract is directly with the federal government, the United States government. So that was a great source of water. Then in 1967, the town joined the Northern Colorado Conservancy District so they could obtain CBT water, Colorado Big Thompson water. And that occurred, I believe, in 1968. In the 60s, also the Windy Gap project was conceived, and actually the water rights on the Colorado River were applied for by the 6 cities, which were Fort Collins, Greeley, Loveland, Longmont, Boulder, and Estes Park. So the town fortunately got involved in the Windy Gap project then in 1967. Starting in the 1980s, the Windy Gap project then was started for construction, which is construction of a dam on the Colorado River west of Granby and a building of a pipeline from that location up to Granby Reservoir. Sometime in the early 80s, there was a controversy started with the building of what was called the Azure Project as part of the Windy Gap project. The Azure Project was a project to dam the Colorado River in Gore Canyon and then produce hydroelectric power and also use it for storage. That was very controversial. And Dale Hill, who was the town administrator at the time, there was called a 6 Cities Committee, which was the 6 city managers, town administrators of the 6 cities, which was an advisory body to the Municipal Subdistrict Board for the Windy Gap project. And there was a notice went out to, I don't know if it was a phone call or whatever it was, that the 6 Cities Committee needed to be reconvened. They'd kind of fallen idle. They were idle. They just weren't active. And Dale asked me, the meeting was to be held in the city manager's office in Loveland. Dale asked me, would you attend on Estes Park's behalf? He didn't want to drive down and he really wasn't very interested. So I said, sure. And I attended that, and from then on, I was kind of the town's point man on water. So that's how it occurred. We had this kind of secret meeting in Loveland of the city committee because the staff of the Northern District wanted the Azure project, and it was in our view at that time, ill-conceived, and it was stopped. But that's how I got involved. And basically, till I retired, I was kind of in charge of the town's raw water, not the treating of it, but the raw water end of it, and dealing with Windy Gap and CBT, the Bureau contracts, the various changes that we needed to do in the water systems, things like that. And beginning in 1992, for 27 years, till I retired, I was chairman of the Windy Gap Participant Committee. So I participated that way, and I enjoyed that a lot. But that was what I did, is in charge of the water. So
with those 6 communities being involved with it, do you think Estes was fortunate because of our smaller size to be part of this larger group?
Yes.
Okay, so
yes.
It was good to get in at that
It was
start.
very good to get in at the start. The problem later happened, how are we going to pay for it? The Windy Gap project annual yield, average yield, was estimated at 48,000 acre feet. So each of the cities had 8,000 acre feet of water. In the 70s, Platte River Power, the Rawhide project was part of Platte River Power. Estes Park also was one of the 4 municipalities in Platte River. Estes Park and Loveland gave half of their 8,000 feet to Platte River Power. Fort Collins gave all of their 8,000 feet. So Platte River acquired a 1/3 share of the Windy Gap project from that. It was just transferred. Platte River took over the obligations. At the time, there was no exchange of money, but now Estes had 4,000 acre feet of water. That was 10 times what we needed. It was okay in the early 80s because the Windy Gap project was just started. The first 3 years, they issued bonds to build the the project. I think the bonds were about $100 million at the time. And they capitalized the interest, which means that no interest was paid for the first 3 years. So the cost of the town was pretty slim. Well, starting in about 1985, we were going to have to start paying our 1/10 share, which is 1/10 of about, $10 to $11 million. And the town didn't have that money. No way to get it. So I was basically told, go find a way to get rid of this Windy Gap water. So I hired a guy named, Craig Harrison out of Fort Collins. He was a recent graduate of CSU. He was very interested in water. He developed a model of all the various water lines on the Front Range from Wyoming down to Denver. But he was very interested in water. And so I hired him to see if we could find a buyer. We did find a buyer. We found the city of Broomfield. Broomfield was a growing community. They had no water. They needed water. So we spent about 2 years with Broomfield trying to sell them basically 3,500 of the 4,000 acre feet of water. And we had a contract with them to buy. The contract basically was they would take over the obligation. They would reimburse us for all expenses we'd ever incurred, plus interest. That didn't work out. Broomfield basically what happened, Broomfield bailed because of problems getting through the Northern District and the municipal subdistrict. Broomfield received water from the Denver Water, and that was not acceptable to Northern. They did not want the Northern District to go below the Boulder Well County line. They just were adamant. And we tried to make that arrangement work. It didn't. But shortly thereafter, although Craig was now gone, he spent a lot of time and got no compensation. MDC, which is out of Denver, big home building outfit, Richmond Homes, was developing Superior. So the Superior metropolitan districts were the development entities for the town of Superior. The town of Superior at the time had like 50 people in it. But we eventually entered into a contract with them to sell them 3,500 of the units. That took about 3 years to get through, but we finally got it. We sold 100 acre feet to Left-Hand Water District and 100 acre feet to Central Weld at the request of the municipal sub-district. They needed Windy Gap water, so we ended up with 300 acre feet of water. So for a period of time, about 5 years, spent a lot of time getting rid of that water. And but we did, and we got paid for it. And Superior now is a very big community with Estes Park's water, but we have sufficient water. But that's the kind of the tale of Windy Gap. And Windy Gap now is proceeding, and they're starting to build the dam up in Chimney Hollow for storage. So, but I did all of that. I had a lot of work involved in doing that. So, and since that time, we've acquired more CBT water. We've renegotiated the bureau contract, which we had to do in the late 90s, and we've also changed all the water rights. The Black Canyon Creek, the Fall River treatment plant, the Big Thompson plant, all are gone, and now we just have Glacier Creek and Mary's Lake. We had to change the intakes for those into Glacier Creek, so we've done all that, and we're set up. We also did, in the 90s, we did what is called the Water Augmentation Plan, which is the keystone to our water system. Augmentation plan is, since our water rights, our direct flow rights are very junior, we can only take those usually in the winter, because there's a call on the river most of the rest of the year. a little bit in the spring. We could take them when the spring runoff occurs, but otherwise we wouldn't have any. Can't use those rights. So an augmentation plan is we used our Windy Gap water to augment, namely the consumptive use of the water we take out of priority through Glacier Creek, run through our system. Then we have to put Windy Gap water, bring it over from Granby and put it in Lake Estes. Then it's returned down to the Big Thompson River. That's our augmentation plan. The key to Estes Park is we don't consume water. We don't have lawns. So water flows, into the house, through the toilet, down the drains, in through the sewer systems, and is measured. We measure the intake, and in reality, we don't consume much water. So our augmentation plan basically requires us to return 10% of the water we treat with Windy Gap water. So we have a 10-to-1 exchange. So for the 300 acre feet of Windy Gap water, we get 3,000 acre feet of treated water. So the Windy Gap water can be used for augmentation. The Bureau water and the CBT water can't, because they are controlled by the Northern District. And reuse of that water is not allowed. So you can only run them through once. But that's the key. That's why we only needed 300 acre feet of water and not 4,000. The other thing about just like to add to our water system is that the town is geographically contained. The Estes Park is not going to grow much. From now on, most of the growth will be infill. There won't be many large annexations. There's just no place to go. You build on all the places you can build. You're surrounded by national forest and the park, so infill. So we're not like Loveland or Fort Collins, the cities down in the valley that are going from now 100,000 to 200,000 and have to take into consideration water for that growth. We don't have to do that. So we have plenty of water, raw water. We're not going to need to acquire anymore.
So it sounds like it's pretty unique to our community.
Yes.
And it's sustainable.
Yes, and it is sustainable. Yes. So
we'll switch gears a little bit here from water. Can you tell me about your involvement with the Stanley Historic District?
Sure. One of my favorite topics.
So dive right in.
Okay, the Stanley Hotel has always been an iconic part of Estes Park. And it was only open in the summer till the late 70s. It was acquired by a man named Frank Normale. I think Frank bought the hotel in 1975 or 76 in there. And Frank, by the way, was from Loveland. I mean, he moved from Cleveland to Loveland. I knew Frank when he was in Loveland. But he bought the hotel. And Frank basically ran the hotel. It struggled financially. It always struggled financially. I don't think anybody will deny that. It went through several problems. Frank sold it to a guy named Jim somebody, I can't remember his last name, who tried to turn it into timeshares. And that didn't work. That was very controversial. Frank ended up with the hotel back because he had a note and deed of trust on the hotel. So he foreclosed after this guy left. By the way, he was indicted and eventually went to prison for fraud, for other ventures. Not Frank. The other guy, Jim. Wish I could remember his name. Anyway, so in the late 1980s, that the hotel, Frank had these plans to expand the hotel. Really, Frank didn't need to expand the hotel. What Frank really needed to expand was customers to stay in his hotel. And the town was very concerned about the Stanley Hotel being shut down and losing it. At that time, Apura was very involved in projects. The Stanley Hotel was in the Apura boundary, and there was a need to protect the hotel from itself and also protect the land around the hotel from being developed that would take away from the lure of the hotel and its location and develop in a way that would be good for the hotel and not a problem. In 1992, the town board determined that they would fund, along with Apura, a project to form the Stanley Historic District, which became the Stanley Historic District. And it consisted of the Stanley Hotel property, the Overlook property, which was behind the hotel. They were both owned by Normale, although in corporate, not individually. And then the ring around was owned by the Finley family. And they had a partnership called FHK. That was Finley, I think that was the issues from the family, but it was controlled by the Finley family. Apura hired an outfit called DSW, Design Studios West, to be the land planning part of this project. And I was asked by the town to negotiate and try to put everything together. So beginning in 1992, we began a series of meetings with Frank, representing the hotel and the Overlook, and a guy named Bud Finley, which was Brooks Finley's son. He was from Texas. And he had an architect from Miami named Raul Castro. So we would periodically have these meetings, and it took about 18 months of monthly meetings to come up with what is called the Stanley Historic District Master Plan. And that document is a planning document about how the property would be developed and rules and regulations. And that document was put into place by 3 development agreements between the town and the individual property owners, one for the hotel, Lot 1, one for the Overlook, and one for the Finley property. And those incorporated the Stanley Historic District Master Plan as the planning document for that area, and that property was then taken out of control of anything reviewed by the Planning Commission or the town board. So in return, the landowners got the ability to develop according to the terms of the master plan without having to go through the Planning Commission and the town board. So they gave up a lot of rights. That whole property was zoned commercial. So at the time, they could have developed all that property as commercial property. So the Stanley Historic District was set in place in 1994 to do that with the Stanley Historic District document. It's worked. The Stanley Hotel now is viable. It is well run. It is preserved. The property around it has been developed appropriately. And I think the Stanley Historic District was a smashing success. A lot of people may disagree with me, but the Stanley Hotel is sitting there right now doing quite well, I think. So,
from your experience, would you say it's this type of arrangement is normal, or even
no?
Especially like the town viewing this private business as an asset,
Yeah,
to take the lead on it.
yeah. No, that's not normal. But one thing about the town of Estes Park that I learned through my years here was the town, because there is no large employment, no large corporations, nobody other than basically small businesses, to be the business entity that does stuff like that. Vale has Vale Associates. Aspen has Aspen Mountain. I mean, things like that. Those control those. The town doesn't have that. So the town has always been in the position as the economic development engine for the town. The town has taken on that responsibility. That is very unusual in municipal governments. Usually there's some private entity does that, or a combination of business economic development councils that do that. They raise money. They're the ones that do it. In Estes Park, it's the town. So it wasn't unusual. And Apura was a big part of this because they were in charge of development, basically, once they were formed. And since the Stanley Hotel was in the Apura area, they were interested in having the Stanley remain a producer of sales and property tax, the increment that they used to fund Apura, fund their bonds and things like that. So yes, it's very unusual. It's very unusual to take away the ability of a town board and planning commission to approve development projects. But that was the deal. In return for the private property owners giving up their rights to develop, then the town said, okay, we will give up our rights to do that. You have a right to develop so long as it's under the terms and conditions. They were very specific. The document is 50-some pages long. I don't know if you ever looked at it, but it's very detailed. Detailed what you could do. There's architectural review. There's limitations on uses. There's limitations on size. The front of the Stanley Hotel was preserved. The 2 lots. Steamer Drive was built by Apura. That's part of the whole project. That was done without private money. That was public money. The old Stanley Hotel ran through Stanley Shopping Center, and so that was changed. But I think it worked out great. So.
And then that master plan, that's a document that will have precedence on that property no matter if it changes hands or anything.
Yes, yeah.
It
ran, well, it doesn't, not in perpetuity, because there was a 15-year life on that, unless you developed during that 15-year period. So then if you developed, then you were still under that. Now, most of the properties were developed, the Stanley Hotel included, and the only property that was not developed was Lot 4. And Lot 4 became the subject of controversy, but the town made a determination that the 15 years had passed, had been no development, so it was separated from the historic district. Now, one thing I'd like to point out, because I think it's when I say the town board gave up all control, no, there was rights to appeal decisions of what was called the Technical Review Committee, which was the committee that replaced the Planning Commission to review proposed developments, to make sure they complied with the standards of the Historic District document. Citizens could appeal, and also the town staff could appeal to the town board, and that occurred several times. And, for instance, that occurred on the development of the Stanley Pavilion. Went through that planning. That was approved by the Technical Review Committee. That went to the town board. I don't know if the Overlook, I don't think the Overlook ever did, but so, yeah. And in reality, in my opinion, the Historic District has really served its purposes and probably needs to be replaced by a new master plan, really, that only needs to deal with Lot 1, which is the Stanley Hotel property. All the other properties have been developed, and they really don't need to be under their current system. However, the Stanley Hotel still likes the Historic District concept, the Technical Review Committee concept, and has not agreed to do that.
So you have brought up Apura. Let's talk about that a little bit and the development of it and some of it.
Sure. Apura, which stands for the Estes Park Urban Renewal Authority, came out of the 1982 Lawn Lake flood. The Lawn Lake flood occurred ran down Main Street, caused some damage, caused some deaths, unfortunately. At the time, Estes was struggling. Downtown Estes Park was struggling. It had become outdated. The other communities now, Vail, Aspen, the resort communities that had really been ski communities were starting to have a lot of summer activities and attracting a lot of tourists that had not occurred. So Estes was really suffering economically because of that. Tourist trade was down. Once again, we have the small shops, small businesses, didn't have a lot of money to refurbish, do stuff like that. And because of the Long Lake flood, which is a federal disaster, you can form an urban renewal authority by resolution of the town board. If you didn't have that, you had to go through a whole planning process to form an urban renewal authority. And there was a outfit called, I believe, Forward Estes Park, which was a downtown business association, and it wasn't formal, but it had membership. And they agreed, on part of the downtown businesses, to fund the start of the process. So that process was started by the town board, who formed the Urban Renewal Authority and formed the boundaries. And the boundaries were basically downtown Estes Park, and also included the Stanley Hotel property, which at that time included where Stanley Village Shopping Center is now too. And it didn't go down Highway 7. It stopped at 36 and 34 there. But it included all the downtown area, down Moraine Avenue. So that was that. Now, urban renewal authorities receive their funding through what's called tax increment financing. The idea is that you form the authority, then at that point, you establish what the tax base was upon formation. Then any increase in property tax or sales tax revenue above that goes to the authority. So you pledge that from the area. Now, typically, urban renewal areas are fairly small, single projects. So a large urban renewal area, when this was formed, it was in 1983, this was formed, was pretty unique in Colorado for its size, because it was the whole downtown area. The other thing that happened, the town pledged not only property tax, usually urban renewal authorities only property tax increment, sales tax. So they pledged the sales tax increment. And that was the key to the success of Apura, because they had sales tax. So that it was formed, and there was an urban renewal plan done. It also was done by Design Studios West, was the planner in that ended up doing that urban renewal document, which basically said, here's how we're going to do all this stuff. And that led to the Elkhorn Avenue streetscape, which was a complete redo of Elkhorn Avenue down to Moraine. And then urban renewal was also involved in funding Stanley Village Shopping Center, help with that, namely putting in the public infrastructure to allow that to occur. They eventually then built the Estes Park Conference Center. The urban renewal area was expanded to include the Holiday Inn area, so that could occur. And urban renewal was governed by 7 board members. They were appointed by the town board. They hired their own executive director. Art Anderson was the first one, and then Will Smith took over. And because they had that sales tax financing, they had money. And they could put out bonds, urban renewal bonds, backed by that sales tax increment and the property tax increment. The other key to Apura was that they did not have to go to the voter for approval of the bonds. That was a key. And so you didn't have the political problem of proposing something like the conference center and having that have to go to a vote, because who knows what would have happened. So Apura became a very important development tool for the town and was very successful. And Apura paid off all of its bonds, and eventually was terminated. APURA, Urban Renewal Authorities last for 25 years. Actually, ours lasted a little longer. The APURA attorney at the time, he was an expert in urban renewal law. He thought APURA could continue on, but the funding was the town. One thing that happened about halfway through, the town realized that they pledged all of their money to APURA because they were frozen in for sales tax. So as the town grew, the town's revenue wasn't growing. So they entered into an agreement with APURA that APURA returned money to the town, both sales and property tax, to the town, except for APURA expenses and payment for the bonds that are outstanding. So a certain amount of money was left for APURA to work with. But really what happened to APURA after 25 years was it ran out of projects. There weren't any projects they were doing. They tried to do the trail through downtown, the Riverwalk, and never got it done. You know, it doesn't go all the way. They just didn't have projects. So really, it lost its steam, and the voters eventually terminated it.
Do you have any stories to share about interaction, involvements with Rocky Mountain National Park in the town?
Oh yeah, really more, not stories, but the attitude. When I started in the 80s, there was a lot of tension between the park and the town. A lot of it arose out of the park's stance on development near the park, wildlife issues, and the park and the town really were not on very good terms. There were some water issues involved with the park, namely Hidden Valley. The town for a period of time took over Hidden Valley after the rec district bailed, and Hidden Valley could only succeed if you could make snow, and the Park Service prevented that from occurring. They wanted to get rid of Hidden Valley. The town was running it. There was a lot of tension there where there's some things that went on that were pretty, I think, underhanded by the park. They used some, they did not provide accurate information on water flows and things like that. So there was a lot of tension. And then Hidden Valley went away because the town figured out after running it for 1 year, they'd been better off paying each individual that went to Hidden Valley $5 not to go than to go. So I believe in the mid-90s, 95, that Hidden Valley, the town bailed, and Hidden Valley was, the ski areas were, the ski lifts were taken down and went from there. But the tension between the town and the park went away when Homer Rouse became superintendent. Homer Rouse was the superintendent, and he made it a point to get along with the town, and he repaired what had been a very difficult situation. The previous superintendents were not. They didn't talk to the town. They didn't like dealing with the town, and so it was a very difficult situation. But with Homer Rouse, he changed that entirely. And following Homer was Von Baker, who continued that, and both of those gentlemen should be commended for what they did, because now we have a great relationship with the park. But in the 80s, boy, it wasn't there.
Do you have any specific memorable moments, such as interactions with the public, odd questions, funny occurrences, all those things, as your career as a town attorney for Estes Park?
In the early 80s, 1980s, when I first started to work, the Chamber of Commerce sponsored a Wild West shootout in Baum Park. I think, maybe Thursday afternoon at 4, once a week. And of course they had two the outlaw and the sheriff, who they had a shootout in Bond Park, and the tourists gathered around. Well, unfortunately, one of the participants was a Larimer County deputy sheriff. He represented the sheriff, and then we had somebody else was the shooter, and they did a Wild West shootout, draw the guns and fire. Well, they fired blanks, of course. Unfortunately, one afternoon, the gun was loaded with live ammunition. We're doing this in you think of Alex Baldwin. We had an Alex Baldwin incident. The deputy sheriff had been out shooting at I think over at the gun range, just doing normal stuff with his firearm, and didn't load it with blanks. Now, I'm sure the deputy sheriff didn't remember that or whatever. It wasn't intentional, but I think he knew once he drew that there was a problem. So instead of firing directly at his foe there, he fired at the ground. Unfortunately, a bullet ricocheted and hit a lady in the audience. She was from Iowa. And she was not severely injured, but she was shot. So that caused a little bit of a stir. And of course, fortunately, the town had insurance, and the lady was taken care of, and she never sued the town. The insurance paid her medical bills and probably gave her something else. I don't know. That was taken care of the insurance company. But the actual firearm, the Western style Colt 45, Dale Hill, the town administrator at the time, till he retired, he had that gun hanging in his office. So, but I said at the time to Dale, I said, our defense should be, we advertise this authentic Wild West performance. And it was live.
That's a good one. Just for the record, when did you retire from the town of Estes Park?
I retired in July of 2019, excuse me. Yeah.
And are you fully retired now?
Not quite. I'm still doing some work for the town. I'm working on some water projects for the town water department, the Glacier Creek plant redo, and also the Prospect Mountain reinstallation of the Prospect Mountain water system. And I'm also doing some work on with the Northern District on inclusions now for the town. So, and when the current town attorney, Dan Kramer, is on vacation, I am available if the town needs to talk to somebody. I've maintained my license, so I can do that. And so I still have my office. I'm eventually going to sell that, but yeah, I'm still involved a little bit.
Can you explain just a little bit the dynamic of running your own law office and having the town of Estes Park as one of your clients? Like, what does that look like for you just to run an operator?
Well, it looked a little different at the start. Probably the work for the town was maybe 20% of my work, 25%, and just over the years it continued to grow. So probably by 2010, the last 10 years, maybe the last 15 years, really, I no longer was doing a general practice. I didn't take on private clients. Maybe occasionally I do a will. I might do handle a probate or something like that. But I wasn't taking on other work. I also, starting in 1978, ran the Loveland Rural Fire Protection District out of my law office. So I did that, and then I represented a couple other government agencies. I represented the Box Elder Basin Stormwater Drainage Authority for 10 years, which was a authority composed of Fort Collins, Wellington, and Larimer County. They built a big detention facility east of Budweiser plant up there. Then I represented the Thompson Crossing Metropolitan Districts, which is the 2534 development there I was their general counsel from the beginning. I represented the owners when they annexed into Johnstown, and so. But at the end, that's all I was doing. And the town, I really could have probably spent 100% of time on the town. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, so it just gradually morphed into doing that. And always liked that. I really liked doing the government style work. I thought that's the stuff I like to do. I was never really fond. I did contracts and divorces and stuff like that, but I like the government style work much better.
Was there a specific reason you had, this nearly 40-year career with Estes Park? I mean, what was your draw to the community when you could have gone to any other town probably to represent them?
Well, first of all, they wanted me to represent them. And the work was really fascinating. It was good. And it's one of the benefits, it's diverse. I mean, town attorney, you handle, you have personnel, you handle land use, you handle contracts, you handle water, you handle electric, you handle all kinds of different things. And to me, it was always just an honor to serve the town. I never wanted to, other than retiring, I enjoyed it. And I enjoyed especially working with the people I worked with, the town staff, and also the trustees, especially the mayors and the town administrators.
So from your point of view, what changes have you seen in the Estes Park, or in Estes Park as a community? And specifically, I'm kind of curious in what changes have you seen in how the Estes Park community has gotten involved or not with their local government?
When I started, I think the town board was dominated by downtown business people. I mean, the board was entirely made up of business. At the start, businessmen. There were no females on the board. Eventually, Margaret Houston was, I think, the first town board trustee, a female, and then Paula Steig, McDonald's bookstore. She was there too, but Margaret was a former downtown business person, and Paula, obviously McDonald's bookstore. She got involved through APURA. She was on the APURA board, and then ran for town board. Great board members on both of those. But slowly, beginning, I think, probably late 90s, what started to evolve was retirees starting to serve on the town board, the planning commission, etc. In fact, the planning commission, the joint planning commission from Larimer County, which started in 2000, was dominated by people that were retirees that lived here. And there was a shift away from the emphasis on tourism and downtown Estes Park to the needs of the entire community. And a lot of those started to become a lot more controversy on land use issues. Most of the retirees preferred that development not occur. I mean, they had obviously lived their lives. They bought their house. They liked it here. They didn't particularly like more people to come in. That in opposition to business community who felt that they needed to continue to grow. And so developments that would have occurred without much controversy now became controversial. And development of the Stanley Hotel, development of Lot 4, just the Joint Planning Commission became the Mountain Coasters, the latest example of the community has these diverse interests. And now you look at the makeup of the town board, it's very diverse. There are, I think, more retired folks than aren't, and it's changed. Also, transparency. The town government is big and should be on transparency. I mean, that didn't occur when I started. We had basically secret meetings. I mean, there was no requirement to notify anybody of executive meetings, and we could have them, and you'd have them, and it was perfectly legal. And but now those don't occur much. So I've seen that shift. Also, the shift in the need to the town government need to be responsive to the entire community. Childcare, affordable housing are big issues that the town has to take on that were not issues before. The issues before were basically economic issues involving downtown Estes Park. We have, I think that's the biggest change I've seen is that occurred. So,
do you want to make any comments on just personally seeing change in Estes Park, whether it be buildings, businesses, recreation, the seasonal mentality of town, anything like that?
Yeah. First of all, the season has changed a little bit. It's expanded. Used to be, when I started, from 1st of October till June 1st, there was nothing going on. Now I think there's nothing going on from January to the 1st of maybe May, but the seasons has expanded. There's a lot more emphasis on recreation. And the town's just bigger. It's doubled in size. The downtown, because of Apura, the streetscape was a rousing success. Downtown seems to be doing real well. The town itself is built. The library was built. The conference center was built. Things like that, the event center, all of those things. The rec district built there. Recreation center. So there's been a lot more building that just isn't core activity. It's more outside activity for recreation and health of the entire community.
I want to talk about a couple of the floods that we've had.
Sure.
And I'm curious because you could kind of take a look at this two ways. You could look at it as the town attorney, but also as a community member of Loveland and working an employee of Town of Estes Park. What was the 1976 flood like for you, or the 82 flood? Can you just relate some of those experiences?
The 76 flood obviously was the major event due to the loss of life. I was in Cheyenne, Wyoming at Cheyenne Frontier Days the night of the flood. I remember driving back into Loveland. I owned a house on East 5th Street. I drove down. On the radio, there had just been a little mention of some flooding in the Big Thompson River. I drove down Cleveland Avenue in Loveland to 1st Street. There was a barricade. There was a sheriff's deputy there. This was probably 1 o'clock in the morning. He said, "You can't go down there." I didn't think much of it. I went back to my house, which wasn't very far from there, and got up in the morning, and then obviously turned on the radio or something, realized what was going on, and actually went down into the river and obviously the scope of the tragedy. In the 76 flood, personally, I knew some people that died. I was involved at that time a little bit with the Loveland Rural Fire Protection District. Ernie actually ran that too. He'd formed that, Hartwell. So we had members of the Big Thompson Canyon Fire Department that was part of the rural district that were stranded up there, were out by helicopter, lost family members. So there was personal, I knew some of those people. I knew some of the people that were killed. Not none of my good friends or anybody, but personally, it affected you. Obviously, it cut off all access, and it took them a couple years to rebuild that. But I wasn't going up and down the canyon, so that didn't really affect me as far as dealing with the town. And really, I don't remember doing any flood-related work for the town. I did a couple. There was we formed in Loveland a committee of young attorneys at the time that did pro bono work for victims of the flood, and I did a couple things for them, but I didn't do anything for the town. The Long Lake flood, interesting enough, just an anecdote, is that on July 1st, 1982, the town's insurance, that time the town insured its activities, is deploys everything through commercial insurance. We didn't have CIRSA, which is the current town employer. We did it through insurance. A regular insurance agent got a commercial insurance policy and commercial insurance. Well, our policies were coming up, so we put them out to bid. And Bartles and No, which is an insurance agency in Greeley, was selected as had the best proposal. So we agreed to be insured through them. And that occurred, that determination was made by the town board at its last meeting in June 1982. And I had been part of that process and actually worked with the agent who did the presentation, etc. So I was up in July. The flood occurred the morning of July 15th. July 14th was a town board meeting. Dale Hill, after the meeting, said, "Greg, have you heard anything from Bartles?" And no, because I haven't got anything in writing about our insurance policy. And remember, the other insurance policy was terminated on July 1st. So he said, "Could you call Bartles and No tomorrow?" I said, I'll call Bartles and No and see what's going on. So I went to work. At that time, I was working in the First National Bank building in Loveland. On the 4th floor. I had a view to the west. Strange, something about 8:30, I saw a helicopter fly by, just flew by. Didn't think much of it. I called Bartles and No, the guy, and I said, "Hey, we haven't heard anything from you on insurance." He says, "Oh, don't worry. We've bound that. I'll send you something." I said, "Fine." And he said, "By the way, do you know there's a flood in Estes Park?" I said, "What?" He said, "There's a flood in Estes Park." I said, "Oh, didn't know anything about it." So I immediately turned on the radio, and yeah, it was the flooding, downtown was flooding. So I ran home, changed my clothes, and drove up through Lyons, because I didn't know if I could get in through the canyon, and drove up and got up here, 10 o'clock, 10:30. By that time, the flood had gone through the town, and they were just mud. So I remember running in. I drove up, and they had the highway blocked, but I got through the blockade. I said, I'm town attorney. Actually, a guy named Jim Littlejohn, who was attorney up here, was manning the barricades. He was the municipal judge at the time, so Jim said, "Just go through." So I did, parked, and I was standing there on McGregor, kind of just north, just kind of looking out, and Rich Widmer, who was the town's public works director at the time, drove up and said, "Get in." So we drove as best we could up Fall River, look at the damage, drove around. So, that, and then I remember helping the mayor, who was Harry Trejan at the time, do a declaration of emergency. So we did that. So that's my memories of the Long Lake flood. By the way, the town was sued because when Long Lake, the dam burst there, it went down into Horseshoe Park. We had a small dam called Cascade Dam, which was the forebay for the Fall River water plant, and was built, not the water plant, excuse me, Fall River Light and Power Plant. We had what's called now the Stanley Power Plant. And that was at Cascade, where the Cascade cottages were. There was a small dam there and a lake, and that was used to feed the penstock that went down into the hydro plant. Well, what happened was that dam stopped the flow of water in Horseshoe Park for a while till the water overtopped the dam and the dam collapsed. And that caused the buildup that actually did a lot of the damage down Fall River into the town, because it stopped it. The Horseshoe Park had basically spread it out, because it's a big park there, so it wasn't flowing as fast as it was when it came out of the Lawn Lake. But once that dam just fell over when it did, all of a sudden it rushed down, and that's what caused all the damage down the Fall River and through the town. Well, the town got sued by the property owners, etc. And fortunately, the insurance company responded and provided cost of defense. The town was not found liable, but that's how that all kind of fit together.
How about the 2013 flood?
The 2013 flood it was interesting. First of all, the night before that flood, Lowell Richardson, who was the police chief of the town, also assistant town administrator, ran a PER for a while, decided to move down to Commerce City, go back into police work. So he had a retirement party, or not a retirement party, that going away party at the Stanley Hotel. So I drove up from Loveland. I knew Lowell real well, and had a couple beers and said goodbye, and I was driving down the canyon at about 7:30 or 8 o'clock in that Tuesday night, and it was Wednesday night. Got my Wednesday night, and it was raining pretty hard. And I thought, gosh, and there are a few rocks in the road, and I thought, it's pretty hard for September. Not used to this, but didn't think anything of it. And about 3 o'clock in the morning, our house is in Mariana Butte area, about maybe 100 yards from the Big Thompson River. We're up a little bit. About 3 o'clock in the morning, I wake up and it sounds like a train is running outside. I'm thinking, what's that? It's a strange sound. But I went back to bed and got up and all of a sudden realized that the Big Thompson River was about 200 yards wide and was flowing across the Mariana Butte Golf Course right there, and there was a flood going on. Well, I went into the office and I got a call from Frank Lancaster, town administrator. And this was probably, 10 o'clock in the morning, something like that. And Frank said, we got a real problem here, Greg. It's flooding. We got to evacuate the town hall. He says, I opened up my desk and I have this little folder or something that has this resolution in it or this document that I can sign that declare a state of emergency. Can I do that? And he says it cites this state statute. And I said, okay, let me look. And he was on the phone. We looked at it and I said, Frank, yeah, you can sign it. Just go ahead and sign it. He says, I will. He says, I'll get back to you. I got a lot of things we got to do. So that's the last time I heard from anybody in Estes Park till Monday, because all communication was cut off. And fortunately, because I was also running the Loveland Rural Fire Protection District, I was the district's representative in the Emergency Command Center in Loveland. So I was allowed in, and I got all the briefings about what was going on, both in Estes Park, down the canyon, and in Loveland. And of course, the only communication was ham radio operators. There was no communication. There was no internet. There was no phone. There was no 911. Nothing. So I didn't hear from anybody till Monday when they finally got some phone service up. And I came up about 2 weeks after the flood. I drove from Loveland to Golden to Blackhawk to Nederland to Estes Park to get here. I spent the night. I went out to spent it out at the hotel on Lake Estes Resort, I think it's called. I think I was the only person there. And I remember I got up in the morning. First of all, it was eerily quiet. There was no noise, nothing, no traffic, anything. And I got up in the morning. I said, well, I'm going to go at 8 o'clock. There was a meeting every morning at 8 o'clock of the town, of the emergency system, and all the town, town departments, county people, all met in the town hall there. And I remember driving from the resort out to the Bighorn Cafe down Elkhorn Avenue, and you could, it was pretty messy, but you could drive. I didn't see one person. I didn't see a car. I didn't see anybody. So I would come up about every week, and I'd make sure that I came up, and for 2 days, I'd come up in the afternoon, usually for the town board meeting or another meeting or something. Then I'd stay and I'd participate in the 8 o'clock meeting. And actually, I participated by phone in that meeting every day for a month, but from my office in Loveland. So I'd make that journey. Now, I went from going through Blackhawk to the next one was when they opened up Gold Hill. So I'd go down to through Ward, and then you'd make that turn on that dirt road through Gold Hill and work your way down into Sunshine Canyon into Boulder. And then when they opened up, actually Boulder Canyon was the next to open up. It was easier just to go to Nederland because it's only about 6 or 7 miles and down through Boulder. And then they eventually opened up 36 and finally 34. One interesting thing, I think I was one of the participants in the only traffic jam in Gold Hill history. It was one afternoon, I left here about 4 or something like that, so it was about 5 o'clock, and if you've been to Gold Hill, it's just a narrow track. I mean, it's not even there was a traffic jam, and it took like an hour to get through Gold Hill or that intersection, so I remember that, and there was just dust all over because that road was just a mess at the time. So that's what I remember about the 213 flood. And then, of course, all the work involved of all the projects that we had to do.
So just to kind of wrap it up here, we still have some time. Are there any other stories or anecdotes you'd like to share, or any memorable employees, town board members that you work with that you'd like to share or bring up?
Yeah, I just like to bring up the people I mainly worked with through the whole time were the town administrators and the mayors. That was who I really with the town administrators, but then as far as the town board, other than all the meetings and stuff, but that's who I really worked with. And from Dale Hill to Gary Klopacki Dale Hill, Gary Klopacki, Rich Widmer, Randy Rapola, Jackie Halbert, and then Frank Lancaster. And all of those were exceptional people. Jackie, we had some problems there. Jackie was not prepared to be a town administrator, and that was a very turbulent 3-year period. But all those other ones I really appreciated working with. And I worked with them usually almost on a daily basis. I mean, usually, if it wasn't daily, I wouldn't go more than a couple days without talking on the phone or being up here or something with them. And the mayors started with Harry Treget. We had Bernie Daniels, Bob Decker, then John Bodek, Bill Pinkham, Todd, Yersa, and now Wendy. Of course, Wendy was on the town board, so I worked with her a lot when she was on the town board. And all of them are fine individuals, and I really appreciated all of them. And of course, individual members of the town board, I'd worked with times, but mainly with them, and they were all excellent people. And really responsible for the development, especially of the town administrators. I think Gary Klopacki was really responded. Gary came, Dale retired in, I think, 88, 89, and Gary took over. And Gary was a real go-getter, and he really moved the town forward. Dale was more like a caretaker, and Gary spent 10 years and then became the city manager of Lafayette till he retired about 2-3 years ago. So he was a real go-getter and stuff like that. So, and I'd just like to mention, I was thinking, you talk about interesting people. Well, Frank Normale was one of the most interesting people that I dealt with, and I dealt with Frank for all the way through that. I actually knew him in '76 and all the way through, and he lost the hotel in 1995, 1 year after signing the development agreement that had the Historic District. But then he moved back to Cleveland. We had a lawsuit involving Lot 4 by the Stanley Hotel when we were going to sell that to Ed Gruff for a wedding facility, and there were lawsuits out of that. The attorney for the Stanley and I flew to Cleveland to take Frank Normale's deposition. Involved the old access through the Stanley Village. But Frank, it was still the same. Frank was a salesman. I mean, full of a lot of ideas. But he loved the Stanley Hotel. You just do that. So after the deposition, he says, "Greg, I'm going to show you something." Frank had this old Cadillac that he drove around all the time, white, and I think it was red and white, big fins, convertible. And he says, "Come." And in the basement of his office building there in the parking area, he still had the Cadillac. So he was a character. The other guy, in fact, he just died. Jim Disney was, a painter, an artist from Loveland. He grew up. He was older than I am by about 6 or 7 years. But when we did the joint, he became county commissioner, and he was responsible for starting the effort to do the joint planning area. And he was a unique individual. And he just died a couple weeks ago, unfortunately. Significant events that we didn't touch on, and I just made some notes on those. I think for the town, the significant events that moved the town forward, there are about 4 or 5 of them. One is being a member of Platte River Power Authority. Okay. And that was done, I think Bob Decker, who was the utilities director at the time, I think he was responsible for that. And that really benefited the town and continues to benefit the town. We've done the Windy Gap project. We've done Apura. The other was the joint planning area. That was started, as I said, by Jim Disney. At the time, it started in 1992. Jim organized an event out at the Y, and he had some people come in. The Park Service spoke, and some other people spoke about what we would now call preservation of areas, land planning, and stuff like that. Jim had been elected county commissioner right then for Larimer County. And at the time, the county land surrounding the town was zoned either O opened, T tourist, or B business. That was the Larimer County zoning. All of those allowed full development. You could build anything in any of them. And you could build sideline to sideline, no height restrictions, nothing. So the town of Estes Park had an up-to-date planning code, zoning code, with a lot of restrictions, but the town's surrounded by Larimer County. And Jim realized that was not tenable. I mean, we wanted to preserve things. So he started by holding this event in up at the YMCA and got the town talking and the county commissioners talking about doing a joint planning area. And it took us 8 years, from 1992 to 2000, to get that done. But what that did was, in my mind, keep the county areas from developing haphazardly and in a way that would not be productive for either the county or the town. And that joint planning area worked until 2020. Actually, I left. The reasons that it fell apart basically were that the reason we did it in the first place was to preserve and do joint planning. But what had happened was that the town, as an urban style area, the county was a rural area now. And the tension between trying to do those just wasn't working, because we had this joint planning commission that was somewhat dominated by the county. A lot of projects were were a problem and things like that. So really the joint planning area, in my mind, needed to go away. But it really worked for those 20 years. And Jim was responsible with that, to do that, and from the county end. So, and then the subsequent commissioners were, responsible for doing that. But I think that joint planning area, I know it had a lot of controversy and a lot of people didn't quite understand it, but it really was a benefit to the town.
Great. Okay. Anything else?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you. I appreciate it. It's been fun.
Yeah, it's fun.